Hello traders, Gary Wagner here, just after 10:30 in Honolulu, 4:30 in New York. It is Thursday, 25th day of August, 2016. Equities have been closed for about a half an hour and did settle slightly lower on the day. Dow Jones Industrial Average off about 33 points at 18,448. When we look at the Standard & Poor's 500, that was off nominally off about a point at 2174, and then NASDAQ off nominally 3.25 points at 4783. That, of course, is basis the NASDAQ 100 E-mini. So traders, as traders and investors await with pretty much bated breath tomorrow's speech by Janet Yellen, of course, on the conclusion of the Jackson Hole conference that is currently underway, we have had a quiet pause in the markets almost all of the days this week. Yesterday, of course, was pretty volatile for the precious metals, but when we look at the equities markets as a whole, what we can see is that they did hit some record tops a couple of weeks ago. Since those record tops have really been in the data, so to speak, we've seen some real headwinds and some technical resistance in that area. You can absolutely see that on the Dow with these highs. These highs have consistently over the last 6 trading days have really gone to the upper ends of that limit on 4 of those 6 occasions. So that's pretty strong if you ask me. Secondly, when we look at these series of bottoms, of course, you do have a couple that come out of this particular narrow band, but there's really no doubt, and that is that we've got the equities markets really in a holding pattern, waiting to see what Janet Yellen will say tomorrow. And up until then, we have been looking at prices that have been slightly lower on the day, slightly lower on the week, but nothing in terms of any kind of a correction or a real sell-off, really market consolidation awaiting new news or data. And so traders, we can really see that when we look at the Standard & Poor's. This, of course, is the E-mini. We have these tops that were achieved a couple of weeks ago. Unlike the Dow, which has really gone to try to take those out day after day, you've had the Standard & Poor's really trading in a real narrow range. We've talked about this over the last couple of weeks, and that is the fact that it is my current take on the market, that as this market came up, it found these tops here. Of course, this was a new record high right in here. Market retraced ever so slightly, but then we had our scouting party, and we have seen this is really our beachhead, or the market building a base at these particular price points. Now, another way to really look at the equities markets is to compare it to recent activity in crude oil. And to that end, I've actually got a split chart with crude oil on the top and the Standard & Poor's 500 on the bottom. We can see that after crude oil came down and hit these lows at $39 per barrel, we had an upside surge in which the market moved to about $48, $49 per barrel, and then softened a little bit. Now, one of the reasons we created this chart initially was because we had noticed this really, really strong correlation between the way oil had been recovering and equities were surging to new highs. And you could see a real tight correlation this back in February and March. We also saw the markets kind of stabilize in both instances, but we truly saw where that fell apart. In other words, that high correlation between a move in equities and a move in oil really fell apart. And that was really after oil hit this benchmark at around $50 per barrel. It wasn't as critical. And so we saw crude oil sell off, but we saw equities really trade higher. And then recently we've seen equities kind of move sideways. Fundamentally, a much different scenario, that being they're waiting on news from Yellen, and oil kind of prop back up, and that of course has distinctly different fundamentals out there, which is the fact that there is some data that supports that tightening of supply, and OPEC really trying to curtail in some way their production quotas. It's going to be an interesting day tomorrow, and we'll certainly have a lot to report on when we do the weekend review. This has been Gary Wagner, wishing you, as always, good trading. We'll talk to you tomorrow for the weekend review after Janet Yellen's speech at Jackson Hole. Bye-bye.